Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Daiva Story 6, Imperial of Nirsartia, a unique blend of strategy and shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer T&D Soft, Daiva Story 6 originally released for the Famicom in Japan in 1986. Now fast forward to 2022 and it's found a wider audience on Nintendo Switch Online worldwide. So if you have the Nintendo Switch Online service, then you have access to this game, and I really appreciate its inclusion in that service, as this is a title I would have otherwise not known about. So diving into the game itself, we'll kind of show off a little bit about what this game has to offer. So you can play this game in 1 or 2 player. Today we'll be showing it off in 2 player. This does ultimately make the game a little bit easier, but it'll also kind of show you what the game has to offer. So starting the game, we're taken to this password input, and if you watched the trailer for the reveal of this title, there is a password they recommended using. We'll get to that in just a second. Initially, we're going to skip the password input. So this game kind of had a continue system that you could use for the password. That's part of what's here. But skipping past here, you're also giving your difficulty selection. There's 4 different difficulties, level 1 through 4. The lower you are, the more difficult the title gets. And then if you're playing with a second player, there's also more war data input. So now here we find ourselves at the base screen for the game. So we actually start out by flying around as these ships. So if you're playing 2 player, each player gets their own screen and they can fly around independently. You've got your main view and you've got your mini map. So one thing that's really unique, this title is Daiva Story 6. There are 7 different stories total in the whole Daiva story, and one of the things that's really unique and ambitious about them is all 7 stories were released on different consoles. So such as the Famicom, as we see here, but there's also the MSX and the PC-88, etc., etc. So each one of those systems was basically a different part of the story. And if you wanted to experience the entire thing, you'd have to play it on 7 different systems. Really, really unique. One of the things that's interesting about them is they do employ a lot of strategy, and we can kind of see even a little bit of that here. But the Famicom version is probably the most simplistic of those, just kind of appeal to maybe a younger audience. So flying around the screen, sometimes you'll come across these planets, and these planets, when you press A to confirm on them, you'll be taken to this screen here. This is basically us preparing to assault this planet. You have 3 different weapons that you can potentially move around. So there's this blue ship-like weapon here. That's a bomb that will drop onto the screen and clear any enemies that are on the screen, as well as shots. So we also have this white ship, which will heal our mechs, and this missile, which will randomly attack some enemies. So you get to pick where in the stage these various power-ups show up, and this is a really neat part of this game itself. So once we've gotten the placement done, you can see that there's also gauge for how powerful the enemy is on this planet, and also gravity. Gravity is important, as you'll see in just a moment. Starting here, so these are our mechs. So if you're playing in 2 player, you'll have both players there. One thing to note, you can't occupy the same place as the other player, so you can even do some things as accidentally pushing around the player, standing on top of their heads. But control-wise, this section is actually very simplistic from a control standpoint. We have the ability to jump, we have the ability to go left and right, and we have the ability to shoot. The jump is not tied to a button, however. It's actually tied to the up button. So you press up to jump. It can sometimes make movement kind of tricky and difficult, especially if you're playing on an analog joystick. The stage itself is auto-scrolling, and one thing that's interesting is even though there's our bomb going off, even though there's obstacles in our way, if you happen to just let your mech stay stationary, you'll just pass right through all the various background that's there. But we can stand on that background as well. I'm not 100% sure why they set it up that way, but it is interesting. So in 2-player, one of the things that makes it significantly easier than playing it on like a single player is that you just have that much more firepower coming out to get the enemies. So that was the health pickup that we'd set up for ourselves, just dropping, and that means we're actually getting closer to the end of the stage. So each of the stages in the game, and there's a total of 15 stages, has a relatively similar progression where you'll be scrolling through the stage here with your own power-up placements coming into play, and then ultimately we'll get to the end of the stage where we have this boss, and unfortunately that's one thing I do feel is a little bit weaker for this title, is that all of the bosses across the 15 stages are very similar. They're basically kind of like this monolithic wall, and if with the proper placement of our missiles, the boss is almost dead before we even encounter it. Super easy to clear. Once like the stage is clear, the planet is defeated, and we get the resources associated with that planet added to our totals there in the bottom right screen. Oh, so when navigation, when you're zooming around, if you're close to a planet or some other hidden enemy, for example, you'll like have an indicator that there's something in that space show up in the bottom left of your screen. So we want to return to home base, which is represented by the yellow map. And at home base, if you touch it, you're given the option of building ships based off of your resources. These come important in the strategy element of this particular game. So here I've got the ability to build a couple different ships. So we basically have like a laser destroyer and a missile destroyer. I have enough resources to build one each, so that's what we do. So from there, I'm gonna fly around real quick trying to find an enemy. Oh, looks like we've got like one nearby. An enemy space fleet. So here's is an enemy ship, and if I can slow down, so the map movement is kind of tricky. So it's kind of like slot car controls, where you press left and right to go and turn your ship around forward and back to increase or decrease your throttle. Anyway, this is an enemy ship. So if I select an enemy ship, this battle doesn't take place with 2 players, it just takes place with the player that engages the battle. And this is kind of neat, as we'll maneuver the ships that we have and have built around like the particular map, and then you press confirm, and you get this like strategy battle where we're firing at the enemy, then they're firing back at us, and based off of the placement and some luck, we'll hopefully destroy the enemy ships or they'll destroy us. Unfortunately, I'm actually really outnumbered with this particular fight, so it might not go super well. So I've lost my missile destroyer already. I just have my main ship and my laser destroyer. So as far as the asteroids are concerned, the asteroids will block missiles, but not lasers. So after 3 turns in the battle, you'll either have the ability to continue the battle, or you can just simply select end, which is what we'll do in this case. So we can show you just a little bit more of the game. In the case of if you wanted to, you could have the second player in a 2-player game engage that same fleet, and they would fight the weakened version of that fleet, hopefully being able to go or defeat it that much easier. So another thing to keep them... Oh, the fleet just warped out. So there are a total of 14 planets you can see on the map, not counting our base. But there's actually 15 planets you need to defeat to clear the game. The 15th planet is hidden. And you can find it by flying over the map, and it's not in the same position every time you start the game. It's random. So we did find it for this particular save slot, and we wanted to show that off real quick. You can see the pink ship is on the map in the middle of nowhere, but yet there's still that object next to it. This is the planet planet Vlitra, which is ultimately the enemy's main like production base, and it's essential to take that out to clear the game. And even if you don't, and you take too much time throughout your playthrough, you'll get a game over. So that's the basics of Daiva. There's a lot to go over. All the systems are relatively simple, but with all of them combined, it makes for a relatively complex game. So I'm going to reset the title one last time, and from here, selecting 2-player, we're going to enter in that code that was shown off in the Nintendo trailer. So that code is tatakao. So in order to enter that code in, you want to go, starting from the top right, you go on the top row over to the 4th character and enter this character in twice. Ta, ta. Then you go back to the left 2 characters for ka, back to the left, and down 2 for u. So, tatakao, let's see, attack. So this basically sets the game up into what I would like to describe as an arcade mode. So it takes out the exploration and you're just fighting through the various stages without having to actually fly to the stages themselves. So if you're just looking to experience the shoot 'em up element of the game, then this is a great way to do it. It does have the difficulty fixed at a higher value, but to compensate for that, you're basically maxed out in the power of your mech, which is just represented in having a significantly larger shield bar. So ultimately, that is Daiva served up for your enjoyment. So as far as the minus flavors I feel this game has, given like the era that it came out, I think it's actually a really interesting and impressive game. The whole ambitiousness of the release kind of just boggles my mind. And I'm really glad to have learned about it. But as far as like what I didn't like about the title, so the map screen controls take some getting used to. It's very finicky, messing around with that whole like slot car controls, using the left and right to turn the ship forward and back to speed up and slow down, and ultimately finding even a planet that is represented on the map is a tricky endeavor at best. And then the bosses, as I was noting with the first stage that we showed off, there's not much variety to the bosses. It's all sort of kind of this like monolithic wall type like boss that fires shots out, let's see, from 4 different weak points. And especially with the placement of the missile all the way to the right, those like boss encounters are going to be trivial at best. Sometimes the missiles will take them out before you even like fight the boss, like in any capacity whatsoever. So that's a bit disappointing, but I guess that's not really what this title was going for. So as far as the plus flavors are concerned, so building those fleets and fighting the enemy ship battles, while there's definitely the random elements to it, and if you don't have a strong enough fleet, you're just going to get decimated. I really like that the particular challenge that the game has set up. And it's one of the things that I really like about it. And just the unique blend of all the different components we have in it, where you're combining together the strategy battles, the exploration, and some story as well, is just like neat. And ultimately, once again, just how ambitious T&D Soft was for releasing 7 different perspectives of the same story across 7 different platforms. So it like really experiencing the whole thing would like not be very easy. And indeed, some of the other like versions I think would be neat to check out, as the PC versions had much more strategy involved than the Famicom version. So you had the far greater stats represented from the planets, as well as certain maintenance that you had to upkeep for your planets as well. Just some neat elements like that. So ultimately, especially, so this title by itself wouldn't be enough of a reason to recommend Nintendo Switch Online by itself. But if you do have a Nintendo Switch Online already, then this, I think, is definitely one that's worth your time to check out. I've really enjoyed just seeing what this title has to offer and kind of being intrigued by it. Although one thing I do feel that is very lacking from it, it would have been great if Nintendo had released at least a translated manual for this game, as there could be a lot to both glean from the story as well as even like knowing what's going on from a control standpoint. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I hope you yourself have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again next time.